Everybody, Tony UV here, live from Black Hat 2025. Another Dirty South Security episode. We are here recording live with Andrew Wilson. Andrew, how you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me. Excited to be back in Vegas for another year Hacker Summer Camp and catching up with my friends, learn a lot more about latest greatest that's going on with security. So,
Absolutely. Andrew is an avid researcher. He's working on his PhD right now on a lot of different things. So, Andrew, why don't you explain a little bit about your background with respect? I know you've been in the industry for quite some time. You've been head of professional services at one of the most respected offensive security places, Bishop Fox. And I know that you've done a lot of work related to offensive security. You're coupling that with a lot of your work with big data models and also AI. So tell us a little bit about your background just for the viewers out there.
Yeah, no. So I started professionally security testing, I want to say about 2009. I was with Spider Labs and on their web offensive group doing security assessments from them. Even before I became a professional tester, did a lot of work with security, but mostly from an engineering perspective, which kind of was like the basis of my love for building things and data and using it to solve problems. So fast forward, I worked for Spider Labs for a couple of years. I worked for a company called Bishop Fox, which I think everyone knows. Progressed through that, was a partner and then the head of delivery services for several years. Most recently, I'm doing work with research and development, specifically around security defense and the use of AI inside that space. Mm-hmm. And that's really kind of my PhD, which is offensive security meets AI. So technically, the PhD is in computational intelligence or AI, but it's AI with a focus on offensive security, really offensive web security.
Well, Andrew, I had a chance to catch up with you back in Guadalajara. And it was great to talk to you then. It's great to talk to you now. Before we get started, let me just go over some housekeeping notes. First off, the Dirty South Security podcast, we just dive in. In fact, this is probably the most pleasantries we've ever had on any episode, but it's you. It's great to make an exception. Here, we like to go straight to the facts. I'm going to be trying to listen to a lot of the points that you're making, and then also trying to see if I can kind of speak from a standpoint of just not to be a contrarian, but see if there's some counterpoints that maybe some of the listeners might be thinking about in terms of applicability, use cases, myth versus hype and actual, data science, legitimacy. I do want to do a quick shout out to VerseRight for sponsoring this overall podcast and production. Also the equipment we have. We just got upgraded with some DJI stuff, so that's very cool. Big shout out to them. But let's go ahead and get started. We have a full sitting today. We don't have any mezcal like we did in Guadalajara.
We do not have any mezcal.
So we'll try to, we'll try to think about the mezcal to happen afterwards later on this week, hopefully. But topic number one. All right, let's talk about AI-powered vulnerability discovery. Revolution or evolution? So just in the scheme of vuln management, I mean, talk about, obviously there's tons of data. Think about Enterprise Fortune 50. They have tons of vuln data that they have, at their disposal to put into an LLM. What are the realistic possibilities for doing some level of effective vuln discovery, right? If you go from scanning to triaging, putting that into a large language model. What are your thoughts on reality versus hype?
Yeah, I think you don't have to look around too far to see that it's not hype, right? There's people who are doing it today, and they're doing it with a high degree of effectiveness, right? Obviously, the big company, and I think a lot of people here are talking about Expo and the work that they're doing. But there's even not in the fully autonomous space, there's a lot of people who are putting out research using AI as ways to address and identify and find things at sort of larger scale, or in things that they maybe don't necessarily know really well, but AI is actually really good at helping bridge the gap on it. So I don't think it's hype. I think there definitely is hype around like, oh, it's going to take all our jobs, it's like going to take over the world in a couple of days. But I think there's enough evidence to show that this is something that's going to actually be really useful to the industry. I think it's going to be very useful for people who are doing offensive testing. I see nothing but upside at this point.
Okay. Now let's qualify vulnerability information. I mean, we're talking about, static analysis from code reviews. We're talking about network vuln scans. We're talking about dynamic application security scan results, and also, software composition, you're still going to hold true that sort of like melange of different types of data are still, able to be accentuated with, putting it into, a large language model set, altogether separately. What are the realistic, I guess, implications of all that vulnerability data, quote unquote, to be into one large data set and to be contextualized?
Yeah, I mean, I think like everything else in life, it's how you go about it and sort of what you're doing with the data.
Right.
Right. If you just take the raw data and throw it in like a RAG or some sort of vector database, and then you expect that that's going to get you results, I think you're going to find that it doesn't work sort of that way. It's not this. I put it in my LLM and I got what I wanted out of it.
Yeah.
On the flip side, I feel like the real sort of game is going to be around learning how to structure questions and then learning how to validate your answers, right? Because the better you can do that, the stronger you can build a case where you can then leverage agents and you can leverage these tools to look at discovery. And in that case, then RAG will become really useful.
Mm-hmm.
But you have to do some of the contextualizing ahead of time, either whether it's through the way you structure your questions or the way that you interpret the results of the answers that it gives back out, so that you can figure out like how you want to prompt chain and how you want to work off of that.
Okay. So, I mean, on the spectrum of myth, hype, all the way to, factual, effective and greater automation results, what are some of the dependencies that basically make, let's say that you have a well-represented vulnerability database, for an application full stack, right? You have, cloud, you have endpoint, virtualized endpoints, network related information. Building off of your last point, does it hinge on how, a RAG is basically engineered to be prompted into being asked what types of information do you want from the vulnerability data, or what types of decisioning do you want to be done with the vulnerability data? What are some of the more complex types of interactions that you've observed in your experience today, or that you think will happen in the near future?
Sure. I think there's a lot of ways you can go about it, right? So like in the context of my day job, as an example, one of the things that AI is being used for is summarizing information really well.
Mm-hmm.
So like when you have a large data set, or you have like a bunch of findings, like, oh, you had like 10,000 instances of a thing or whatever, having a tool that can use a natural language to query inside of that and then summarize it and give you feedback, especially if you need to sort of like nudge it directionally, like, I want you to look at this data, but I want you to look at it from this lens, and then I want you to give me feedback on that, right?
Right.
This is where I think AI has like the lowest hanging fruit to give you some immediate advantage, because I mean, I don't want to read 1,000 instances of a thing, and I'm sure customers don't really want to go through it too. You want to give them a high level, you want to give them a summary, and then raw data to go after it. And so like this is one use case that's like kind of a no-brainer in some respects, right?
Right.
The second part requires like contextualizing. So like my PhD is on really computational intelligence, offensive security, but I want to approach it in a way of cognition, like how people think of their problems, so that when you're structuring your agents, you're structuring your agent in a way that's thinking about the problem in the same way.
Right.
And so like kind of taking your AI stuff to the next level, there's a lot you can do to structure the way that you query, right? Which has like one part, how you store the data, what data you store, where you put it. And another part goes into that level of taking the information and then building off it, which I think is a little bit harder than kind of the first thing.
So much I want to ask there, especially on contextualization, because I think that a lot of the things that would make, two different programs for two different companies to be successful or not, leveraging AI and large language models that have a lot of own data, is in that querying language, right? It's in that training the model to be able to, extract and, render information that's meaningful and contextually, relevant for what you're trying to do in the vuln management space, correct?
Right. So when you're talking about like tuning, right? Tuning is obviously complex.
Yep.
And you have to ask yourself the question, are you really going to tune the model, Are you going to tune the data, or are you going to tune the prompts, right? Because any one of
Valid.
those things can actually be used to like get you greater reliability or get you a little bit more accuracy,
Right.
right? If you want to like, I don't call it sway the answer, but if you want to have more of like a generalist, uh, LLM where you've trained it to kind of nudge it in a particular direction or especially, then training the model and training using the data is like obviously the best way to do it, or a way to do it. But really what I've seen is with good prompting, like with actual good structured questions, and using an LLM that's sophisticated enough with like a broad enough base, like some of the public models, it actually does a really good job of like actually helping you contextualize it if you can use things like the semi nudging of like RAG and like structuring your way that you say like, hey, using these data sources as opposed to everything you know. I want you to think about the problem, but I want you to start here as your frame. And then that sort of stuff has, in my experience, like a lot more reliability, a lot more consistency between the way that it delivers answers, and you get kind of that control without it being like, you know, again, LMs are just averaging machines, right? That's all they're doing. And if you want to sway the average, that's how you can kind of like play it to get to your advantage to give you the consistency and better accuracy in your answers.
Okay. No, that sounds good. We let's close out Vuln discovery piece with some false positive, realities, because we would be remiss to not talk about false positives within the vulnerability management space. And I think there's a lot of high hopes for what AI models are going to help to be able to clean up a lot of the false positives, the time consumption that's associated with operational, efforts in, triaging false positives. So what are your thoughts? What are some realistic expectations that are really going to be available for mass market consumption for false positive reduction?
So my first thought is that, you know, the system of AI, any AI system, the hardest part and probably the part that makes it reliable in the first place is the way that you validate the things that it says, the way that you track and triage inside of it. In a way, it's almost like we're going back to critical thinking 101, and we have to ask ourselves questions like, how do we know any given answer is true or real? And we can't just take it on the basis of like, oh, they're an expert, or oh, AI generated it. Like, you're looking for evidence inside of your answers to assert that this thing that they give you is more accurate or real to the first place, right? And so, like, how you structure validation inside of an AI system to reduce false positives, as an example, is like the single greatest thing that you really have to spend a lot of time in when you're building these types of agents, has been my experience, right? The second question you should ask yourself is like, what is a reasonable amount of accuracy in the first place, right? Like, I know people will say like, oh, it's only 87% accurate. Like, I look at it in the label and it says, well, it's not true or whatever. And it's like, okay, but is that 87% compared to what? Right? Like, how accurate are the reports that you get today? Are they all 100%? Are we sure they're 100%? Like, how do we know that? And these sort of things kind of feed back and forth with each other, right? One of the best pieces of advice I got on AI systems in the first place was design the system first as if you were going to do it with a bunch of humans, then figure out what you can pull out through AI and then run it in parallel and then validate it against what people are doing. And then you can kind of look at your spread and say, yes, I'm getting the results I'm looking for. Yes, I'm getting the accuracy. And like all those sorts of things drive you towards reducing false positives, making sure that what you get back out of the AI systems are accurate, because now you have measurements you can compare it against. And in some cases, you can train it against the answers that humans are doing in the system to give you that feedback that says, yeah, like this is accurate, not accurate, etc.
I mean, I kind of feel that we're still accepting the fact that a lot of the technology that's doing SAS, DAS, traditional vuln management with network scans and stuff like that we're gonna accept the fact that there's gonna be a large false positive base of information, and we're gonna clean that up contextually with within the LLM with different AI models. So it seems like as an industry, I think that we're kind of like our scanning technology really hasn't been creative enough or hasn't evolved enough. So would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would say like if you look at dynamic analysis, at least as a guy who was in the field for a while,
right,
took some time out of the field, came back in the field, I feel like we haven't really evolved our dynamic analysis much. This is why I think, to answer the question of is AI like, an evolution or a revolution. I think it's somewhere in between both.
That's okay.
I think it's somewhere between both, right? Like, in one way, it is an evolution away from Dast because there's a lot of things that Dast does really well. But it's a revolution because it can give you a greater flexibility without sort of being like if you use regular expressions, you either get it so like broad that you get a lot of false positives, right? And then find more, or you make it so narrow that when you're looking for things, yes, you have a higher degree of confidence in what you found, but you may have missed a whole bunch of stuff that it probably could have caught. And I feel like AI gives you that balance between those two.
Let's go into topic 2. I think we're at a really good junction to talk about adversarial testing, right? And, actually building off of false positives conversation, do you feel that there's any truth on the following statement that exploitation or proving exploitation of vulnerabilities is a way to kind of show, true positive? I mean, it might seem like a pretty, obvious statement, but I've actually ran into people that actually disagree and say that just because you exploit a vulnerability, there's a lot of things like, okay, what were the conditions that you exploited the vulnerability in? So, what are your thoughts on that as we go and talk about, exploit development automation? We're having a lot of guests on the show, by the way, just dynamically. So just please enjoy. We won't catch their names, but please enjoy. But what are your thoughts on that, Andrew?
Yeah, I mean, when I was an assessor, pen tester, hacker, offensive security guy, whatever, I would definitely define my approach as pretty aggressive. And I feel like exploitation and proving out vulnerabilities is actually strategic and tactical advantage for me as an assessor. And that when I have an opportunity to do it, I almost always take it.
Of course.
Right. Unless there's a scenario or an instance in where the customer said like, hey, no go. My experience is that with every exploit, I can get a little further, deeper into the system, and I can use that to prove out other parts of the model and get maybe easier access to see things I wouldn't have otherwise seen.
Absolutely.
I think you should give that ability and that authority into something like AI? Probably not, right? Like, this is where I start to pull back a little bit and say, I'm not sure I'm so comfortable. I mean, we just saw what on the news, the guy deleted the whole database and prod or whatever and gave AI authority. Like, you have to have a lot of controls around certain pieces that to me, like, I would be cautious. But in terms of like general philosophy, yeah, I mean, if it's there and there's no rule of engagement that says otherwise, proof is the greatest way to show impact, as opposed to just saying like, oh, here's a pop-up and there's something bad with it. Like, you could say like, oh no, I compromised an admin account, and with the admin account I could get into blah blah blah, and like those start to show people that these vulnerabilities are more than just superficial and whatever. So.
Well, let's go with some rapid fire talks related to taking vuln information and kind of trying to see if exploit development automation is actually possible. So let's talk about chain building. With AI, do you think that it's realistic for either homegrown adaptations to be able to build some level of RAGs where they are doing some chaining different vulnerabilities together to kind of show a kill chain for a specific type of exploit testing effort? What are the complexities in that? Do you still think that we're far away, or are we here today already?
No, I mean, I think we're already here today. Again, I mean, we see what Expo's putting out on the news with some of their public prompt chains, and you can see that it has the ability to connect ideas together. For me, it's like going back to computer science and cognitive science or whatever. To me, like, whenever you're building an application, that application is like an expert system. When it's designed by an expert, we already know that it has advantages over other things. Like, what scanners would you say are like good ones? Like DAST. If you say like there's a DAST scanner or a SAST scanner, like what would be a example of one that doesn't stink?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're all pretty bad.
I mean, like I would argue that like Brakeman was amazing. Like if you're going to go do,
you're just testing like
Ruby on Rails,
yeah, right.
So what I've seen is that like when it's constrained to a topic,
yeah,
right, and it's built by a person who actually knows that topic really well.
That's true.
We see that their cognitive model, their ability to like see the problem and connect it through automation, gets you better results than it would be if you go like any of the generic ones. To your point, like they all kind of suck. Like
Right.
they're not good,
Yeah,
right?
because they're trying to amalgamate all the different
Right.
types of payloads that.
But when it's like an applied cognitive model, like how I think about a problem and
Right.
I'm building it in automation, I'm doing it. Well, AI is no different than that, right?
Yeah.
In my mind, it's actually, I think, a tool that facilitates doing it easier
Yeah.
than it would if you were trying to like custom build or write it all yourself. And so like, yeah, absolutely. I think like, I mean, I run mostly local LLMs in my house, and I try to like keep it all, local. So now I can use all the data and I don't have to worry about like privacy and sending stuff into people's cloud and being too worried about it. And I think like with those types of things, I'm already seeing people use creative stuff for like chain automation to help them find stuff for like bug bounty or find stuff for testing. Absolutely.
Let's talk about environmental adaptation when it comes to exploit testing. I mean, I think that's one of the kind of the higher hurdles for AI to be able to operate successfully in. But I think we keep going back to talking about Expo. I've seen both high praises and also criticisms about just the grade or quality of some of the vulnerabilities being found. In general, environmental adaptation is hard for even some humans. I think that, we both know that the majority of manual exploitation testers that are out there are, if you just look at worldwide, I mean, I would say they're okay.
Yeah.
And that's, putting it nicely. But environmental adaptation for, a data model, and then for it to be able to be engineered with cognition to know what to do next under certain different types of scenarios by understanding the stack, understanding the environment, maybe authorization flows, authentication, and other types of attack vectors to type of leverage. That's difficult, or would you disagree with that?
No, it is difficult, and this is where it's like the genius is in the prompting, not necessarily in the system, right? So like, I'm doing a workshop at the AppSec Village on Saturday, so healthy pitch for that if you're here for 3 something, I think, I don't know. And we're going to talk about reverse engineering web applications. And I've given this talk a bunch of times before. This is the first time we've done it as a workshop, and one of the big changes we made is we started showing like how AI can help you with that to adapt to new environments, right? Like I know what kind of questions I'm trying to get at, but I don't necessarily, I mean, I don't know everything. I don't know every version of Drupal or every version of WordPress or whatever.
Right.
But an LLM that's been very broadly trained on a whole bunch of systems or has the ability to go out and pull in a lot of information for you, it can actually give you really good insight into scenarios that maybe you're not already an expert in, right? And so like we have a case where we're talking about decomposing like a React file, and you can actually use it to take like obfuscated code and say like, hey, I know what I'm looking for. I know these dangerous functions. What are the primary ones? And then we work it through the logic, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But I don't necessarily have to know everything about it to do it. The AI can actually help me bridge that gap.
Let's skip over to another topic within the offensive mindset, is the defensive evasion techniques. So, is the in your experience, what you've seen and studied, is evasion techniques simply relying on historical data sets where evasion techniques have worked under different scenarios? And if yes, how is that, providing an effective, data model to leverage on highly adaptive and evolving technology stacks?
Right.
So where are we today with defensive evasion, in your opinion, when it comes to AI models, trying to react to the latest, detection and response, and, types of like sandboxing types of technologies that we're trying to do logically within an environment?
Yeah. So I saw like a Twitter thing yesterday. Don't hold me to like where I saw it. I know I saw it and I thought it was funny. A guy posted like a Gen AI packer that he created that could pack like any file, and it evaded everything on the market, right?
Yeah.
And it was just something he created, and he was using AI to do it. It's an interesting game because again, it's one of those places where it's very cat and mouse, right? I think that people who are doing evasion at the top level, like bad guys or professionals or red teamers that are like at the top end, I think they're so far ahead of what most detection does that getting around it and not being detected is almost like it's like the bar of entry. It's not even critical mass, right?
Right.
And I remember like I was talking to a friend of mine who does a lot more work in that space than I did, and he was like, "Oh yeah, I put it in Go because at the time nobody had any signatures to look for anything, and it was always mutating every time you would recompile it, and so like you basically every time you did it, it would evade." And he's like, "Great." And he goes, but if I signed it, I could get a signed cert and I could do whatever. I would evade everything and nobody would be able to stop me. And I was like, well, why wouldn't you do that? And he said, what's the point? They still can't catch the other one.
Right.
So I'm going to keep this one in my back pocket and this one in my back pocket and this one in my back pocket. And so like, in a way, like it's how I feel about evasion and defense and some of the things that you see in it. The only way I've ever seen like really effective is less signature oriented and more like monitoring of the system internals and looking at state changes or looking at stuff in memory in terms of like
heuristical
processes.
analysis.
Like that's been a better catch for what I've seen in the in functional than signatures. I've always found it to be like it's really good for something that's emerging and more like it's already happened and we know, and now we want to stop the bleeding.
Yeah.
But in terms of like, can it detect everything that's new all the time? I don't actually know if that's the point for a lot of these. I think they're more geared towards the stop the bleeding approach, right?
So that's interesting. I want to kind of stay on that point for a second. So, I mean, do you think? I mean, I think that the data models have the ability to look at functional operations within an environment. Call flows, data flows, and be able to understand what's normal, right? Especially if you're looking at a pristine functional environment. And then are you saying then to use that data set as a way to do some level of like anomaly detection for level of,
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what a lot of like the more advanced detection like software does.
Yeah.
Is they try to create a baseline of normality.
Yeah.
And then they hook the functions that other people might be doing to do process escalation and attacks. And thank you for that. Gracias por su llamada. They like looked and then like went on purpose.
Yeah, no, I don't know. That's okay. Well,
anyways, to your question, no, I think a lot of the low level pieces is they watch a lot of the function calls at the base operating system to see as data moves between the system, knowing that it's almost like a choke point, right?
Yeah.
And if you monitor those things, you have a better chance of like doing it than the signature based analysis or whatever. The problem is that normality is hard. It's subjective. I mean, I've been working in a defense space now for like the last 2 years, working in a sort of SOC and looking at alerts and doing detection engineering. And, it's a lot of times we just get a bunch of alerts because this is what the environment is doing, even though the alert would say, hey, just reminding you that this is risky or whatever. And so it's almost like getting to a point where if you go too high level, it's difficult to discern it from actual real human behavior in a system.
Yeah.
Which is why I think like getting as low as you can and looking at those calls and looking at those pieces, like that's where you have your best luck in detections.
I want to go to, we've had a couple different run-ins with here. I was actually laughing to myself when you were trying to reprimand those people in Spanish. That was hilarious, by the way. Let's go to topic 3, large-scale offensive operations, because I am seeing this is the Dirty South Security Podcast. We keep it scrappy, so we just have this rig set up here. So I don't know when this sort of like leniency is going to be able to give way here around this Mandalay convention space that we're at right now. But let's go into topic 3, large-scale offensive operations. Let me open up with this. How realistic? I mean, one of the things that surprises me is the amount of poor prompt engineering by a lot of people that are trying to dive into the space.
Right.
I mean, personally, I still think that you have family, friends, colleagues that they're horrible at even doing a Google search.
Right.
Right now, those same people, even within our industry, are trying to, do vibe coding and prompt engineering and stuff like that. It's scaring the shit out of me. So, I mean, when you talk about staying offensive for a while, how realistic is large scale offensive operations for, a multinational company? I'm talking like a 5 billion, multinational company that has a lot of internal applications, maybe a lot of external applications, a lot of, legacy and kind of complex emerging technology type of, environments. How realistic is this for, a lot of people coming here visiting, Black Hat? to be able to have some takeaways and say, yeah, let me homebrew
Right.
a offensive, overall platform for us to do internal pen testing.
Yeah. So, if you're relying on the end user to do the prompting itself, I think what you're going to find is exactly what you're talking about, which is some people really don't even know how to use Google correctly at this point, right? And you're still trying to have to coach them on, we'll call it like advanced use, et cetera, right?
Yep.
I was talking to a friend of mine not so long ago, and he had this proposal that the secret's going to be hiding the prompts away from the users and putting the prompts into the IDE itself behind the scenes, right? So like when you're doing things or working with the system, you're not even really going to see the prompts that get engineered. It's going to be a specialist underneath it who's put it in the hoods for you, right? Like I was just doing a test for someone not so long ago, and I saw a case where it was like, put your comments and write a note, and it's like, or click here and generate an AI summary that like did it all for you. And like
Right.
the thing behind it is the prompt that's interesting,
Yeah.
right? And it's just pulling in and pointing at a bunch of stuff. Now, you still have to train people kind of behind the scenes on how to do prompting and what that looks like. I just read a book called The Prompt Engineering for LLMs, I think is the name of the book. It just I know the guy who wrote it. That's why I read it. It's from O'Reilly, but it's a great book, and it's all about like how you structure it. And so yes, there will be some training for people to leverage and use those systems, but I think you're going to pull it into the IDE, not give people carte blanche, if that makes sense.
The ripeness of the data, that is necessary to do large scale offensive operations in a major, let's say, FI or banking institution. They have the money, they have the personnel. A lot of these top, banks and FIs around the world, they have 2,000 person cybersecurity professionals. What is the, longevity of the data? What the data rightness? How important is that for an offensive AI platform to leverage? In terms of doing like ongoing pen testing, like, ongoing like disruptive, pen testing as a service, if you will, from within. Just continuous pen testing is better said, not pen testing as a service, but continuous pen testing,
right.
Continuous exploitation. What amount of data is necessary, not necessary? I would, just open question on that.
So you're asking like, if I'm a big company,
yeah,
and I have my own internal team,
right?
How realistic is it to use AI, and what sort of data might you be looking at to build the offensive program? Or
so let's take a real example. Let's take a top 10 U.S. bank. They have wealth and investment, commercial banking, consumer banking. Let's take consumer banking. They have their consumer banking portal. They want to do continuous dynamic analysis ongoing. So, for them, let's say that, I don't know, JP Morgan or one of the top banks, they basically say, hey, Andrew, we want you to come in, Dr. Wilson, to be able to come in and to build out an offensive rig to just do dynamic testing and just testing really the most realistic of use cases for our consumer banking platform. In
right.
terms of data set, like what type of data, longevity, age, I mean, they could have data for 3 years, right, on some of the prior DAS scans. What are some of the necessities? I would say that the most, the older the data,
right.
the more useless it would be.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I don't know how much use there would be in looking backwards at previous like data sets of like reports or pen test reports,
right?
Unless you're doing something like generating like potentially remediation associated to it, like remediation, revalidation type of stuff, right?
Right.
And I could see a very real use case where I'm looking at old reports and I'm saying like, how did these get done? Can I generate tests to go see if they were done? Right. And maybe even automating some of that remediation review associated to it.
Right.
But in a real sense, if you're talking like using that data to train an agent to go after other targets internal to the bank, I probably wouldn't even use much of that data at all. Right. I think like a more realistic scenario for me and how I think of it is like, I would want to know how I could build the use cases and scenarios that are relevant for that business area.
Okay.
And then use the knowledge that the bank has about that specialty business. So then I could look at things like business logic attacks or ways that it would have impacts more specific to it. Like you've been pen testing for a long time, and like I'm sure whenever you go into an environment that's completely new, like if you get to a utility company or you get to something, like those systems are really like niche, and they require like you to understand a lot about how the business works. Like that's the sort of stuff that I would want to try to like build into my agents to like lower the bar of entry for people who know what are the security implications.
Yeah.
So I don't have to go learn every single thing about it. That's where I think you're going to get your best bang for your buck.
It's I always love talking to you because it's like you restore my belief in humanity and cybersecurity, especially in AppSec or pen testing, because that there's a lot of people that are just going to grab like 2 years worth of DAST, feed it into a data model and say, hey, do what's been done in terms of these requests, right, to this API, and try to see if you can get 200 OKs on some fuzzing parameters, right? And they're going to be like, hey, we're doing it. But when you basically say the things, and for all the listeners out there, Andrew put down definitely some golden nuggets of just understanding functional use.
Right.
And it bears reminding all the time, especially in adversarial intensity, to be able to walk the application, understanding function, so that then you can carve out dysfunctional abuse cases, right? And that's what you're speaking about. So definitely, happiness in the heart there to hear that. But let's go into some dark side stuff. Let's go into topic number 4, the AI arms race, offensive AI versus defensive AI. I'm going to start with, we're big in putting out a geopolitical risk report every year called Envisions.
Okay.
And we like to look at, this way life is with all the political, economic, social related issues that are divisive across, the globe. It's a really interesting time for geopolitics.
Yeah.
And a lot of places, are, there's technology powerhouses like Microsoft, like Amazon, like Oracle, et cetera, Intel, that they're investing billions of dollars. And, to be able to offer services and platforms, how accessible, right, in this arms race, if you think about like, okay, developing nations in Latin America, okay, how accessible, how much parity is there really for offensive and defensive AI platform solutions to be accessible to Guatemala versus, I don't know, Luxembourg?
Right. So I guess my first opinion, it'll be not the most politically nice one, I guess, is that my experience in LATAM so far is that their overall security posture is like 10 years behind everybody else in the United States, at least a decade.
Yeah.
And they're still running like, raw old school Apache servers for like government stuff. And I mean, it's all over the place. And it's like a hodgepodge of they use technology to solve a problem and they invested in it, but that it doesn't feel like it's modernized and it's maintained and it's whatever. And so like I do suspect that for countries that are kind of like set up in that direction, I don't imagine they're going to do much with AI or leverage it in a way that sort of immediately provides a benefit for them.
Right.
I think price is going to be prohibitive, at least for now, right? Yeah. It's sort of like when people are first starting with this sort of stuff, you find yourself in a spot where like the price becomes a big barrier, and then eventually it'll go down and it'll go down and it'll go down. It's like the CPU race, or I got my big, iron machines to do my big servers or whatever, right? Like it becomes price prohibitive. And in that way, I think like some of the smaller countries are going to have an issue implementing it from a defense perspective, even if they were like, hey, let's renovate, let's move towards it. I mean, you've got to look at it from the position of LATAM, which is, so many systems are just relying on like raw human interaction that like they don't see a lot of value for cybersecurity because there's not a lot of like big web presence for things. Like I can't go to half of the restaurants and order online. I could go to like Didi, or I could go to like Rappi or some of these guys and I can order from them, and so there's people who might adopt pieces of it, but for the average like business, I see it cost prohibitive, and I see them not seeing a real need for it right away, from that perspective.
Let me plant something in your brain to see if this scares you. So AI versus AI models, offense, defense. And what about the threat actor of an AI agent that's in collusion with a defensive agent?
Yeah. My opinion on security assessment is it's always about playing the person. And even if the person's a robot, it's like when I'm doing when I was a professional tester, I've been into a bunch of environments where it's like I'm not up against every compliance rule and everything we know about security defense. I'm up against that company, that business,
Right.
those developers, those people who actually did it,
Right.
right? And in a way, like I look at it not adversarial, like I'm against them, whatever, but like I have to beat what they know. I have to beat what they can do. I have to think about it in a way that's novel to that particular group. And in the same way, I think that defense and offense are going to run in the exact same scenario where agents, it sounds great to say like, oh, you just pointed at it, it's going to go do XSS or whatever, but like details really matter and how it's composed really matters. What it does to solve that problem really matter. And it's going to be the same for defense. It says like, how am I implementing controls that automatically fix these things before they go out? Or how am I going to have it do detection that someone's attacking me? Like those technical details are going to be, I think, the deal breaker between, I'll call it who wins, right? Between them,
Right.
Because you're always playing the person, you're playing the game.
Yeah.
Right?
On the offense versus defense, it always seems that offense is always the one that's advancing more, and that defense is always having to play catch up. Are you seeing the same things, or do you think the same thing is going to happen when it comes to the AI arms race in terms of offensive AI platforms, cognition abilities, evasive techniques, all the things that we've talked about, versus the defensive side of detection and response, active mitigation?
Yeah. I do see offense pushing the boundaries of what's in the realm of possible and pushing technical pieces faster than other parts of the industry. I think some of that's motivated a little bit by the freedom that comes from being in that position, right?
Yeah.
And we could get in a long angle about how people see security and defense and whatever. I know we've talked about this before in Guadalajara, but that's better with the tequila or mezcal, right?
Yeah.
But I guess what I would say is like, you have to think about inertia, right? I always tell people, like, I call it business inertia. The bigger the business, the harder it is to make it move,
Absolutely.
And so it's like, if I'm a small group of 20 pen testers, what's my inertia to push on new technologies and try new things out and see what it's going to do for me to help me get to solve a problem or help automate or help make me more fast, like reliable? Like that's like a conversation with like two people, and then we're going to go play with it.
Right.
But if you're at a big security company and you want to go build a big defense thing and you want to go layer it out and you want to think about all the pieces, like that tends to have a little bit more, I'll call it weightiness to it, and a little bit more like research and time. And it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's like when you're talking about an individual versus a business, of course the individual is going to move faster.
To close out this one on the arms race of offense versus defense, we're in a global age or a global time period where governments, corporations are trying to do more with less. So they're trying to naturally build on automation and then trying to leverage, data to be able to make decisions both on the defensive side, rapid response, so they can depend less on the costly aspect of leveraging humans for, operational use.
Yeah.
So what do you say to that? I mean, this goes back to the, early on you touched upon like, okay, AI actually replacing, human-based pen testers, which I think we both agree that that's not going to happen anytime soon, just because of the quality of those that are truly doing manual exploitation, which is really a creative art. But, as we look ahead, as you see the theme, we see it on the economic news, right? Governments, everyone's like really pushing and investing in greater automation. How do you see businesses, industries, and governments in the next 10 years evolving? Do you think that we're at a fad, or do you think that this is truly going to be a hockey stick type of adoption and use? We're going to see, everyone from the multi-billion-dollar MNC, even in manufacturing, right, a lower maturity sector, all the way to a startup, that's got 5 employees with maybe a seed round of funding.
Yeah, 10 years is a big spread.
Yep.
But I would say my gut tells me it's a hockey stick, not a fad. There was a great conversation I saw about, like, do I really think that AI is going to replace all software engineers within a period of, like, let's say 5 years? And the answer is probably not, like, no. But like, if you look at like my life as an example, I started as a software engineer. The languages that were available when I started programming were like Fortran, Pascal,
Yep.
COBOL, C++, C,
right.
And that was it. Basic had just come out, right? And so like you're you're talking about like this very machine oriented thing that requires you to think and understand how machines work, right?
No MATLAB?
No, I know MATLAB. I did not do MATLAB. And then like as time has progressed, we got languages like Python and .NET and Java, and we
Right.
started moving this abstraction layer up. And so if you think about AI as like another abstraction on top of it, I think the dream has always been I should be able to write a series of requirements and I put it into a system and the system gets me what I want back out.
Yeah.
And if you think about engineering from that end or AI from that end, do I think AI in 10 years will have the capability of reasonably or realistically doing that off well-defined requirements? Yeah, I think it will. I mean, I really, truly think it will.
You know, I got to say, Andrew, I really admire your, I guess, hope for the future because, you know, first of all, I respect you because you're you know, an academician, you're a practitioner, so you're the 2-in-1, right? You're studying this, you're researching this, and you've been behind the wheel. I guess I'm jaded by the way our industry has adopted new technologies, you know, and really kind of just, you know, very poorly implemented them without a lot of forethought, really without a lot of true engineering. A lot of things that you talk about make sense, but the problem is that everyone wants to be, you know, everyone wants to be able to go ahead and get this implemented as soon as possible in terms of automation and, you know, large language models and, you know, different, you know, agents that can, you know, be operationalized and things like that. So we're going to segue into our last topic, which is basically reality check on implementation. And I want to still stay on that point that I just talked about. It's kind of a depressing point, I'll admit. But, you know, I talk a lot about threat modeling.
I love threat modeling.
One of the things, my case in point is the amount of threat models that are out there that are just horrible, and they're just quick and dirty. Let's just do a quick and dirty threat model on a mnemonic that was invented in the 1990s. And I was talking to somebody that happens to be in the food distribution logistics business, multinational billion company, and they're like, yeah, we do Stride, we do threat modeling and stuff like that. And I was like, okay, show me a spoofing like abuse case in AI. Like show me like some like this is a problem for show me like an actual like abuse case. Show me where there's someone's trying to abuse a caller, or maybe there's like, you know, something within an AI application or the architecture where this is, you know, a problem thus far. There's other problems that we have in more realistic threat models, but I digress with the threat modeling stuff because I don't want to, you know, we don't have any alcohol. My point is that, you know, what's the realistic, you know, implementations for companies, you know, as we go forward and having to do the following, you know, ongoing assessments, integration into different tools that are going to enrich the data model, training, budget. I mean, we could talk about budget for another hour.
Yeah.
So give me a reality check. And I know you're a very hopeful, you know, type of silver lining type of person, it seems.
Definitely not me.
But, you know, give me an implementation reality check on this topic.
I think to your point, there's a lot of pressure to put AI on something like you're just going to sprinkle it and it's going to make everything better.
Pixie dust, right?
And I think there are some opportunities where you could see AI speed up or accelerate or make certain things easier. The problem is, like, the question you have to ask is, are those the real valuable things that you should be putting AI on, right? As an example, we had a problem in a company where we talked about reporting as an example. And one of the things we sped up was like, you know, how do you basically put the soda in the can, you know? And on one level, like, that's great. And of course you should be trying to do it. But like, if you're actually trying to make the soda taste better, they're not related to the same function. That was the joke my boss would say, right?
Right.
And so like, just because I could like generate a bunch of templates to put out a report really fast, it doesn't mean I put out a good report.
Right.
You know, and it's the same with AI and adoption, that you really do have to think about like, what's the value creation that you can use inside of it. But I think most people are just going to go the low hanging fruit first. I think they're going to sprinkle it on, they're going to turn it on, and with that, they're going to introduce a lot of risk, right? Because like I've already seen scenarios where AI is like in a spot where it can query behind the scenes and it can do things off of information that it wasn't supposed to have access to, all through just prompt injections because they just sprinkled it in and they weren't thinking about what they were doing, whether it's user controlled or whatever. And so like, do I think it's going to introduce a whole new world of problems? I don't know. My 20 years of doing testing and working in security at this point, more or less, it's like, yeah, of course they're going to do that. Like, of course it's going to create more problems. And of course it's going to be something that, we're going to continue to push people back to best practices on. I think that's a given.
I just see so many things that are flawed that, we're in 2025. I just shudder to think of like, a Gartner Magic Quadrant on AI, defensive, offensive, when a lot of the analysts don't understand, the architecture that's behind, that's needed, for really sustainable and scalable AI models. And it's frightening, but there's a lot of individuals that are, leading security programs, and they
Right.
buy so much into, that ongoing, hype and still within, 2025. So as much as things change, a lot of things haven't changed in our industry.
Right.
And so that for that reason, I'm a little bit more of a Debbie Downer. But let's close on some uplifting thoughts, Andrea. Go ahead and.
No, I was going to say, like, to that point, the single greatest thing I've seen in industry has been the push at the framework level to make things secure by default.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We've seen entire categories of vulnerabilities change and almost like pull themselves off the market by having the framework implement a lot of the protections inside of it, right? And I think that eventually what should happen is you should see the same thing in AI and how AI is implemented and how AI is used, where it becomes like the burden of the developer or the burden of the framework that's actually allowing you a safe pattern for implementation, so that developers are just doing whatever it does to take it done. If you've ever been a developer, you've got like 15 priorities, you've got a sprint, you've got your boss yelling at you about your velocity and all the scum terms to say like, hey, get it done, right? And so, like, of course, they're just going to do whatever it takes to make that happen.
Wait, so I want to stop you there for a second. You talked about like we've seen a proliferation of hardening on some of these frameworks. Now, if you look at the totality of like, okay, embedded components, JavaScript libraries, Linux packages. The full stack of web frameworks, micro frameworks. Would you say that the majority of these frameworks that a lot of these open source or closed source providers, they've actually increased their ability of hardening or implementing security by default?
Also, like Microsoft for sure has.
Yeah, Microsoft, yeah, it has. But that, yeah. But that's just one technology player. I'm just looking at the spectrum, right? In terms of
Right.
like.
I guess my point is we've seen a pattern of hope.
Yeah.
Right? We've seen a pattern that has created some level of effectiveness that worked very well at the time.
Right.
When .NET made it very difficult for you to deploy an application that had a bajillion problems associated to it by forcing you down pathways in order to enable the features, and then caution you when you're doing more dangerous stuff, right?
Right.
Like I've always believed in that philosophy. I was a secure BSD guy.
Yeah.
By heart, it's like if you don't know what you're doing, then you shouldn't turn it on in the first place, type of thing, right?
Right.
And if you see that model, repeat itself in things like, again, .NET, I think even Spring did a lot to like push towards better behaviors in their developers within the framework itself. We've seen that advantage right inside of it. Yeah. ORMs is a great example, right?
Yeah.
Like ORMs make data access easy. Then with the making it easy and if making it accessible, it also makes it a little bit more secure against things like SQL injection, unless you start going off the rails and doing crazy things like, unless you're finding O-days and like SQLize or whatever. Like, this is where I hope we're going to see everything kind of push more and more back to,
right,
within that sort of quality expectation standards at the framework level.
Yeah.
At least that's my hope. Right?
I think you're right there. I will agree with that. I will say that, where there's been increasing and hardening of different platforms, there's been an absolute decrease in understanding good, resilient security architecture.
Yeah, I agree with
I mean,
that.
architecture, I think, people that know good architecture, I mean, they're dinosaurs. I mean, they don't really teach architecture. I think threat modeling lost an opportunity to really, take security architecture and make it to be a little bit more mainstream. And this is what we've been trying to do with Pasta. But I I see the architectural problem to be a major one, right? Because people aren't considering, flows, privileges and calls, right? Authorization models and intents, and that sort of thing. That's the reoccurring thing that you see with a lot of simplistic like breaches, right? We saw, I don't know if you saw the T app news, would basically
Yeah, I
had
saw
like,
that.
all those different API endpoints just, publicly available to different, data sources of confidential information. But that's the part that really scares me. And I think that the lack of security architecture, and then with the adoption of AI models, is going to really, introduce a new era of irresponsibility.
It definitely can, and it probably will at some level. Um, but I don't know if it's going to be. It's like IoT, right? Like we saw that with IoT.
Yep.
Everyone had the same race. They just started putting technology on internet on random things and hope for the best, and we saw where that got them. And it'll be a period of like I'll call it suckiness, right? That happens, which is again good point. We're all going to have jobs, but I think it eventually regresses back to where it's supposed to, right? That's why I don't get too optimistic. Like I'm an AI guy. Everything's about regression back to the mean, right? So
Right.
just because it's ugly for a little bit while it's new, it doesn't mean it stays there. It will go down.
Well, Andrew, it's been great to talk to the gringo from Guadalajara. Always a pleasure, my friend.
Thank you.
Ojalá
Thank you.
que lo pases bien esta semana y que podamos un día regresar a la mesa con un buen tequila, un buen mezcal.
Sí, por supuesto. Gracias por su ayuda. Gracias por invitarme por este podcast. Really enjoyed it. Thank you for having me.
Keep the chair another 20 minutes.
Thank you.
We get another 20 minutes.
20 minutes to say goodbye.
20 minutes to say goodbye. It's going to be a really long goodbye.
Yeah, no. But no, I appreciate it, Andrew. Thanks so much. Dirty South Security Podcast signing out from Mandalay Convention Center, Black Hat 2025. Take care, everybody.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.